I still remember that morning, the kind of dawn that carried a chill, not just in the air but in the bones. My hands were cracked from years of washing other people's dishes, and the smell of detergent never quite left my skin. The city was still asleep when I boarded the early bus to Maplewood Estate, where I worked as a live-in nanny for the Carters, the richest family I'd ever met. I was 23 then, fresh from heartbreak, a widow too soon, and a mother without a child. My baby girl Ruth hadn't survived her first winter, and sometimes when I saw the boy I was paid to care for, little Daniel Carter, I felt a strange ache that was part love, part guilt. Mrs. Carter never smiled much. Her world was marble floors and charity galas, where laughter came only if the cameras were flashing. Mr. Carter was colder, a businessman who looked at people the same way he looked at numbers. But Daniel, he was different. He was 5 when I met him, with wild curls and a laugh that could light up the shadows of that enormous house. But he was lonely. His parents were always traveling, always too busy. They left him in my care, and slowly, over time, I became more than his nanny. I became the only one who tucked him in, who listened to his dreams, who taught him to tie his shoes, to pray, to say sorry. Every morning he'd run to the kitchen shouting, "Martha, Martha, I had a dream." And I'd pour his milk, pretending not to cry when he called me that way, because that name, Martha, wasn't just my name anymore. It was a purpose. Years passed quietly, like pages in a diary no one would ever read. The boy grew taller, sharper, more curious. He'd ask questions like, "Martha, why do you live here instead of with your family?" I'd smile and say, "Because you're my family now, Daniel." But I never told him the truth, that my small rented room downtown had gone empty long ago, that the only picture of my daughter sat hidden under my pillow, worn at the edges from too many nights of whispering her name. One day, when Daniel was about 12, I noticed a change in him. He began pulling away, spending more time in his father's office, watching the men in suits come and go. One evening, I overheard Mr. Carter saying, "He needs to learn the difference between help and hierarchy. Don't let the boy get too attached to the staff." That night, I cried quietly as I folded Daniel's laundry. But the next morning, he came to me, eyes wet, clutching my apron. "They said you're not coming with us to London," he whispered. "Say it's not true." I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him I'd be waiting when he came back. But I knew better. Rich families change staff as easily as they change furniture. I brushed his hair gently. "Daniel, my darling, you'll do great things one day. And when you do, promise me something." "Anything," he said, his voice trembling. "Promise me you'll always be kind. The world will hand you everything, but never forget the ones who handed you love." He nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. Then he hugged me so tightly that I thought my heart might shatter. When the car left that morning, I stood on the porch of Maplewood Estate, waving at the little boy who pressed his hand against the glass until the gate swallowed him from sight. That was the last time I saw Daniel Carter. Years turned into decades. My hair grayed, my steps slowed. I worked for other families, raised other children, but none ever called me family. When I turned 58, my hands began to tremble too much to hold a baby bottle, and no one wanted an aging nanny anymore. So I moved back to the little neighborhood where I'd grown up. I lived in a small apartment, the kind where walls were thin and loneliness echoed louder than laughter. I sold handmade scarves by the roadside, humming lullabies I used to sing to Daniel. Sometimes I wondered if he ever remembered me, if he ever thought of that promise. One winter evening, a storm swept through the city. I was sitting by the window, sipping weak tea, when I saw headlights flash outside. A sleek black car stopped right in front of my building. I didn't think much of it. People got lost all the time here. But then, someone stepped out. A tall man in a tailored coat, holding an umbrella. Even from behind the rain-specked glass, there was something familiar about the way he moved. Calm, deliberate, graceful. A knock echoed on my door. When I opened it, I froze. "Good evening," he said softly. His voice, deep, warm, carried the ghost of another time. It took me a moment to recognize him. The eyes gave it away. Same shade of hazel, same gentle curiosity, that once asked me about the world beyond Maplewood. "Daniel?" I whispered. He smiled. "I was hoping you'd still recognize me." I couldn't move. I just stood there, trembling, my hands covering my mouth. "You grew up," I managed to say. He laughed lightly. "That tends to happen." I motioned for him to come inside, embarrassed by the state of my small apartment. I don't have much to offer. Just tea." "I didn't come for tea," he said, his tone softening. "I came to see you." He looked around, at the cracked walls, the faded curtains, the old photos on the shelf. His expression darkened slightly. "You lived like this? All these years?" I shrugged. I had enough. God gave me more than I deserved. He was silent for a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, an old, wrinkled photograph. It was me, sitting by the fireplace, reading to a 5-year-old Daniel, both of us laughing. "You kept this?" I whispered. "I carried it with me everywhere," he said. "It reminded me who I was before the world told me who to be." My eyes blurred. The boy I once sang to was now a man, richer than I could ever imagine, but still looking at me like I was someone who mattered. He stood, his jaw tightening with emotion. "Martha, I came to return something." "Return what?" I asked, confused. He knelt slowly, right there on my worn-out carpet. "A promise," he said. "You told me to be kind, and I failed you for too long." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I whispered, "Oh, Daniel, you never owed me anything." He looked up at me, his voice breaking. "Then let me owe you this. Your peace." He reached for an envelope on the table. My trembling fingers opened it, and what I saw made the room spin. Inside the envelope was a thick stack of documents, property papers, a letter of transfer, and a bank draft with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. I stared at it in disbelief. "Daniel, what is this?" He took a slow breath. "It's yours, Martha. The apartment, your expenses, everything you'll ever need. I bought this building and registered it under your name." I blinked, stunned. "You bought my building?" He nodded, eyes glistening. "You spent your life giving others a home. It's time you had one that's truly yours." My throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that, Daniel. I didn't raise you to pay me back." He smiled gently. "I know. You raised me to remember, and I never forgot." He looked around the small room again, his expression softening. "When I was in college, I used to hear your voice in my head, telling me to do the right thing, to stay kind even when people weren't watching. That voice, it kept me human." I sat down slowly, hands shaking, tears refusing to stop. "You became everything your father wanted." He shook his head. "No, I became everything you believed I could be." For a long moment, we just sat there. The sound of rain tapping the window, the air filled with the quiet weight of years unspoken. Then Daniel pulled something else from his pocket, a small silver locket. "I found this in one of the old boxes at the estate," he said. "It has your daughter's name inside. Ruth." I froze. My hand flew to my mouth. You found Ruth's locket?" He nodded. "I think you left it in my nursery years ago. I always kept it safe." I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was the tiny photo I'd thought I'd lost forever, my baby's face, smiling in black and white. My vision blurred completely. "Daniel," I whispered, "why did you keep it all these years?" He smiled faintly. "Because when I was a boy, you once told me that every act of love leaves a trace. I guess this was yours." My heart ached, not from pain, but from a tenderness so deep it hurt to breathe. I reached out and touched his cheek. "You were my second chance at motherhood." "And you," he said softly, "were my first lesson in love." That night, he stayed for dinner. We ate simple food, soup and bread, but he said it tasted better than any banquet he'd ever attended. He told me about his life, how he'd taken over his father's company but changed everything. Higher wages, free education programs for employees' children, homes for single mothers. I listened in awe. Your father would be proud, I said quietly. Daniel chuckled. Maybe, but I'm more interested in making you proud. He told me about his wife, Alina, a teacher who ran a literacy center in the city, and their 2 children. They've heard all about you, he said. They call you Grandma Martha already. I laughed, though tears still lingered in my eyes. Then they must be angels. They'd like to meet you, he said, if you'll let them. My heart swelled. Oh, Daniel, I'd love nothing more. He looked at me earnestly. You gave me love when I didn't deserve it. I want my children to know the woman who taught their father what compassion truly means. The rain had stopped by then. The air smelled clean, almost holy. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It was as if time itself paused to honor the reunion of 2 hearts that had once been bound by nothing but kindness. The next weekend, Daniel came back, this time with his family. His wife was warm and gentle, her smile the kind that made strangers feel safe. Their children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, ran up to me with flowers. "Grandma Martha!" they shouted, their small arms wrapping around my waist. I felt something inside me finally mend, a fracture that had ached quietly for decades. We spent the day together, walking through the park, sharing stories, laughing. The children begged for my old lullabies, and I sang them softly, watching Daniel's eyes glisten as he mouthed the words along with me. That evening, as the sun dipped low, he asked if I'd join them for dinner at their home. "We have plenty of room," he said, "and Alina insists you shouldn't live alone anymore." I smiled. I'll think about it. But the truth was, my heart had already decided. Weeks turned into months, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged again. Daniel visited often, always bringing fresh flowers or homemade pie from his kids. He even redecorated my little apartment, fixing the broken heater, repainting the walls, hanging pictures of us together. New memories beside old ones. Sometimes he'd drop by after work, loosen his tie and say, "You know, Martha, every time I make a decision, I ask myself, would she be proud?" And I'd smile. As long as it's made with heart, I will be. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from my balcony, Daniel said something that stayed with me forever. People always talk about the ones who give them money, or power, or chances. But no one talks about the ones who give them love. You did that for me, Martha, and that's worth more than anything I'll ever own. I looked at him, the boy who'd once cried in my arms, now a man who'd turned his privilege into purpose, and I felt peace wash over me. I whispered, "You kept your promise." He smiled gently, "And I always will." That night, after they left, I sat by the window again, holding Ruth's locket close to my heart. The city lights flickered like candles, and I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, for love that transcends blood, for kindness that outlives time, for a boy who grew into the man I'd always hoped he'd become. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with grand miracles or heavenly signs. Sometimes it comes in the form of a knock at your door and a man who kneels, not out of guilt, but out of love. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I could almost hear Ruth's voice in the wind, soft, proud, and full of light. "See, Mama, you were always meant to be someone's mother." If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness never goes unseen. Heart subscribe to Tale Story House for more stories that heal souls and make hearts remember.